Hi guys, and welcome back to the podcast. So today we have a repeat guest. We have Lorcan Daly. He's a PhD candidate and researcher out of AIT, or it's actually Technological University Shannon at the moment. Haven't they changed it?
Yeah.
Lorcan, thanks a million for coming on. How are you getting on?
No worries. Thanks a million for having me again. All good now. Keeping well. How are you keeping?
I'm good. All is good this side now. So we're just, I suppose really, I was chatting to you last year. We were talking about recovery protocols and that around GAA.
Yes.
So you were in the thick of the PhD at the moment, or at the time, and at this stage of it now, you have all the research in, and you're kind of just waiting to get the final details finished up, so you can add that doctor to the start of your name. So it's soon coming. But come here. Do you want to talk through basically what you've been doing over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so as you said there, I have the document in, so I'm kind of at the very final stages, and I'll have the Viva soon. So essentially, I was almost 4.5 years now, with COVID, it got delayed a little bit. But it's just a large project that's kind of overall looking at Gaelic Games players, kind of what happens to them during match play, how long it takes to recover, what kind of things they might do to aid recovery, and then kind of how physical conditioning has an influence on kind of workload and recovery. So it was a very enjoyable project. I really enjoyed the few years. It was great to get to know the different teams and coaches, and obviously I learned an awful lot myself, so I'm very grateful for the time.
And come here, when we talked last time, you were basically one of the I think the biggest takeaways that I had from what we chatted about was the fact that you were saying the preseason training was having a huge effect on their recovery in season. Now, do you want to kind of give an overview of what that was again, just for the people who may not have heard the last podcast, what that was and what the results were from that specific study?
Yes, I suppose we can't exactly say that with 100% certainty, but we can more or less indirectly say it. That's kind of what our results are indicating. But basically, we found that fitter and stronger players, and even more powerful and enduring players, they can both do more work during games, so they can outwork their colleagues, but then they can also recover faster, even having done more work. So that kind of might tell us, if you're a player and you develop your strength, especially in aerobic capacity in the off-season, pre-season, that's going to make you more resilient all year if you can maintain that. And it's also going to make you a harder worker on the field, but then you'll be fresher coming back to your next training Tuesday or whatever. So it's a two-pronged benefit really that we kind of found, and that kind of reflects other work in rugby league and different things like that. But essentially what we'd like to do in future is see, will we know that a certain level of strength or aerobic capacity is going to protect you and give you all this. But we want to see if you progress it further. So if you get even stronger, are the benefits even more? So we're not 100% on that, but we'd like to investigate that going forward, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So it has actually been looked at in other sports as well. That's interesting. So it's
yes.
So there is definitely research backing it as well as your own. When you say that there's improvements in performance and work rate on the pitch, what would you look at exactly there?
Yes, so we looked at a lot of various GPS metrics, so the likes of sprints, accelerations, decelerations, total distance, and essentially the fitter, more powerful and quicker players, they perform more across the whole game, so there was less of a decline from second half to first half. So they were able to just output bigger work rates across a game when we look at their kind of less fit colleagues, as you might expect. But I suppose the small surprise for us was that even though, you might think, well, they've done a lot more work, they're surely going to be sore for longer, but they actually recover faster. So it's kind of, as I said, they're kind of two-pronged things. So that was very interesting. Okay.
And when you're saying, just to kind of piggyback off what you said there at the end, you were talking about how they recover faster. In what way do you mean recover faster? Like physically, psychologically, like how would you be looking at recovery in that?
Yes, so I suppose that was a big question as well. How do we even measure recovery, or what do we do with that? So for us, we went with kind of multifactorial approach. So we looked at psychological recovery, so how fresh they felt, their fatigue, how much they slept, kind of how ready they feel to play, their muscle soreness, etc. And we also looked at their physical measures. So we did drop jump, counter movement jumps, so their muscular power. And then we looked at a blood marker of muscle damage, so kind of indirect marker of muscle damage, creatine kinase. So we kind of used all these things just to get us an overall picture of how the player is doing. And obviously we measure these before a game and then after and in the days following. And the players who we see a faster return, we kind of take it that these are recovering faster because they're feeling fresher, their muscles are ready to go, and there's less muscle damage evident. So the way we kind of identified that as well in simpler terms, so we ran different analysis, but we split them into a high strength, for example, and a low strength. And when we compared them 1-to-1, we see that the high strength, just the return is much quicker. So they just end up being fresher. They're probably ready to go. So in a Gaelic football setting, for example, you might have a match Sunday and then train on Tuesday. So when we look at that Tuesday marker, the stronger players are almost fully recovered, but then the weaker players, there's still a lot of damage going on there. So that might tell you, if you're a weaker player and you're playing a match Sunday and you've training again Tuesday, you might be still sore and you might have a lower quality training versus a stronger colleague. So that's kind of is a key reason why you might need to improve your strength so that you're able to go all week throughout the season.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a couple of ways that I actually want to look at that or after is that, so let's say you are training on Sunday. Now I don't know if this came into your into research project that you were doing, but if you are training Sunday and you have a match, you have a match Sunday and you're training Tuesday, and let's say most teams then train again on a Thursday or Friday. Usually, yes. I expect a GAA. Is there a compound effect on that? Is there anything that you found that maybe if they weren't fully recovered and they were training on the Tuesday, that they could be still having those performance segments on the Thursday, Friday, and even following into the next game?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a very good question, and I think intuitively a lot of coaches might know they mightn't be fully recovered. They might kind of intuitively know that, so it might be the hardest training, or they might be taking that into account slightly. So that may be enough. I suppose what we found was that the perceptuals, like readiness, how they felt was back to normal. Their muscular performance, their vertical jump was back, but there was still some kind of residual muscle damage there from the blood marker, which might have taken another day to fully recover. So they weren't fully recovered, but they're probably okay to train once that's kind of taken into account. So I wouldn't necessarily move around the whole training week just because of that, but I would certainly take it into account and maybe not maximally load them because there is some bit of damage to the muscles.
Yeah, okay. And I know it's probably position specific then as well, because if I'm right, I remember we had discussed in the last one, it was about like high speed running was one of the main indicators of what would affect recovery. Am I right in saying that, or was there something along those lines?
Yeah, definitely. So we also looked at what do the players do during a game that causes the most damage. And essentially total distance didn't have too big of an indicator, but it was more the kind of high intensity markers, accelerations, changes of pace, the high speed running, sprint distance, those real intense movements, those are what cause the most damage, because I suppose they're so intense. There's a lot of eccentric kind of components. So that's just, it's the very intense kind of changing the pace, twisting and turning, sidestepping. That's going to cause a lot of damage. So if you're a player who does a lot of those, you're probably going to incur a lot more damage and fatigue.
Okay, yeah. And when you say total distance, you mean, because you often see it if you look at, like, if you're watching, let's say, the Champions League, for example, and you see, let's say, a player comes off for Liverpool at the end of a half or at the end of the game, and a lot of the time they'll have total distance, so they'll have ran 11 kilometers or 12 kilometers.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying is that total distance does not have as much of an effect, or from what you found, doesn't have as much as effect as if he had run for, let's say, 2,000, high speed run was like 2,000 meters or 3,000 meters.
Yes. So it definitely does. It is related to an extent, but we found that the high intensity markers have an even stronger relationship. Okay. So obviously total distance just is a crude marker to include everything, but we kind of pinpointed it that the really high intensity stuff that had a stronger association. So that from that, we could say, if you're a coach, you could monitor these high intensity variables if you have access to GPS. Yeah. And you say, right, the players who do a lot more high intensity work, they may be more likely to be sore at training Tuesday or whatever, whenever they're back.
Okay. Yeah, so I suppose on a more specific level, especially when you're looking at football or GAA, is you're kind of looking at the people around the midfield, around half back line, half forward line, who'll be covering that bit more distance. Would it be worth then, do you think, having that in mind over the length of the season, that they are covering a lot more distance in general to what, let's say, a fullback or a cornerback, and saying that they may need to focus on their recovery a small bit more in between it, like getting everything right from training, and like to I guess reduce injury risk or anything like that. Do you feel like it's position specific, or is it like a blanket? Do the same things apply to everybody?
No, I think it definitely will be position specific. I know there's bits of work from Malone and Mooney and a few other guys that have looked at just GPS markers within a game. And when they split it quarter by quarter, what you see when you look at, we said, the full back, full forward line, basically they're doing the same work throughout the match. There's not much of a decline. But if you look at the half forward, half back, especially the midfield, you'll see they do a big output at the first quarter. But then as the match goes on, you see a kind of steep decline, just because they're doing so much and they're getting so fatigued. By the end of the match, they're covering a lot less ground than they were at the start. So that's kind of telling us that these guys are obviously working a lot harder, number one, but then they're experiencing more fatigue as well. So I think coaches or players themselves might need to take that into account, and that, the central guys are covering a lot more ground. They are doing a lot more work, so that they may be more likely to experience fatigue. But then on the other side of it, they're probably going to be the fitter guys as well, and potentially the stronger guys. So they're probably able to handle it better to some degree. But it's just kind of a balance there that you have to kind of take into account. So I would say overall, the kind of central third, whatever, are probably going to experience a bit more fatigue. But we didn't necessarily look at position specific, but I would think that just based on the data there,
okay, and then with looking at their the preseason training and the stuff that they did, like, what are you looking at there? What are you trying to, like, what are you pulling from? Is there anything that specifically you could say, oh, these people here had a heavier squat, or these people were able to run a good 5K or had more sprints done in the preseason? Was there anything like that stuck out?
I suppose we didn't necessarily implement a training program, but there is different things like that in Gaelic football, that if you can kind of build up a very high work rate in the pre-season or off-season, be that through a number of strength sessions or building up a high tolerance for high intensity running, that's going to stand to you throughout the season. You're going to be more resistant to injury and you're going to experience less fatigue. So generally in the pre-season especially, you're looking to drive up your capacity to tolerate the game's demands, essentially the high intensity running, the different things like that, whether it's through mass runs or whatever you're doing tempos earlier on, and that you're basically building up the aerobic tolerance for all the running demands during the game, but also that you're going to build up your strength and neuromuscular qualities so that you have the resistance to muscle damage as well. So just those two things, that you're building up a good strength base and power base, and also obviously the running base as well. So you have time in the preseason to do that, because you don't need to be fresh for a game every week. So you can really go after it then, and then try and maintain it throughout the year.
Okay. And you actually mentioned them there. You said mass training. What is that? Maximal aerobic?
Mass runs are just an example of different kind of running structures you could do, things like that.
That's popped up a small bit this year for me. I've heard it more this year now than I had other years. Do you know what that what is it like? What are you looking at with the mass running?
Yeah, so that's just kind of it is very popular now. You see it a lot in clubs and intercounty things like that, but it's essentially looking at maximal aerobic speed. So you could do a test for that, whether it's a 1.5k or something, get the average speed, and then you take that as your aerobic speed. And then essentially there's a lot of research recently that's looked at research that if you go above that threshold a lot in running sessions, that's going to drive on your aerobic capacity quite well compared to lower intensity. So it's gotten very popular among team sport athletes in the last few years, and it seems to be an effective method to do so. So it is good.
And have you ever looked into like how you'd structure a training session around that? I know you kind of talked about it there. How would you do that?
Yeah, so there is different ways you can put it into a session. There's obviously pros and cons to doing it. It's probably a thing you could do more so in the preseason or off season, that you have time to implement it. If you're putting it in to a regular team training, if you put it in at the start, obviously the players will be fatigued after, so that could interfere with the training as well. So it might be a thing you could do in the middle or something like that, just a bit of a top up, get a few runs in, but obviously get the main aerobic work from small sided games or large sided games, whatever you're doing, and kind of let that drive the aerobic conditioning to an extent, because obviously you're getting all the other benefits of playing the game. But it is certainly a thing you can implement if you're doing primarily small sided games and you don't have as much longer distance running. You could include that for a different stimulus, and that could be good then.
Okay. I know I'm kind of going down this rabbit hole with it, but like to jump into it, like if I was structuring it for myself, how would I do my runs? I get them to run a 1.5k. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you could get the time and just have a gauge of the time, and then you kind of know where the threshold would be for them, so you can split them into groups, higher, lower, or different groups of that, or essentially just get them above that threshold for whatever volume you're doing. You can increase the volume, so you could add sets and reps over time if you have a number of weeks to do it. But there is many different methods. You can do sprint interval training and different things depending on time of season. And generally guys like to have some kind of mixing up with it. They want to do the same protocol over and over. So
yeah,
it's no harm to have a few different tools that you can implement, and obviously let the game-based activity be the number one driver, I would say.
Okay. Yeah. Because like I suppose when you're in season, it's the last thing you want to be doing is just absolutely dogging lads first, but dogging lads so that they're fatiguing and then they're missing the next training session, or they're missing games as a result, or even putting up with injuries. So I see what you mean when you're talking about that. Yeah, you saying that it's like include that sprint training at the start of the season, and then in season you're just looking for more high intensity work, or would you be squeezing it in?
Yeah, I suppose generally in season guys are going to be at the fitter end anyways, and they probably have a number of commitments, especially if they're playing club and different things like that. Guys might be playing junior and also different training, might be playing with a school team and another team. So a lot of guys might probably have enough at the minute, but you'll have to judge it by the team, and kind of the coach would have to assess what the needs are of different players and things like that. But it is a thing you can certainly include along the way. But you have to kind of make a judgment on where the load is and what guys need, and then kind of implement it from there if needs be.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I know this isn't exactly what you were looking at, but I kind of gone on a bit of a tangent here now, or down a hole. Is that I wonder how long it takes to see the adaptation to that type of running, to that type of anaerobic work. Do you know what it is in terms of days or weeks or months?
The timeline, generally for the kind of really high intensity stuff, you'll see a rapid increase in aerobic capacity. So even for 3 or 4 weeks, you see a big increase, and then beyond that, the adaptation starts to slow down a bit. So for the lower intensity stuff, you might see a more gradual increase over time, so a larger number of weeks maybe. But if you start to implement real high intensity repeated sprint or whatever, you're going to see a fairly rapid increase for something like 4 weeks. But then after that, the adaptations start to slow down a good bit. So that's the kind of trend of it. Yeah.
And if you had a 2 week block, let's say, are you 14 days, and the match is on a Sunday, 14 days later, when in your own I guess experience, or have you any idea of when would be the last time you would squeeze in like a sprint session? Let's say you were scrapped the small sided games and everything like that, and you were saying, okay, we need to get him a small bit fitter for this game in 2 weeks' time. When would you structure? When is the last day that you'd put that in, so that it's not actually fatiguing them, but they're still getting the benefits of it?
Yeah, in that instance, you could probably do a lot in the first week, certainly, and then maybe start to taper it down a bit. So maybe something like 5 days beforehand, you'd start to limit things that way. Obviously, you want them fully fresh for a match. So even the second week might be a bit lower. I suppose there is a lot of context of where the athlete's fitness is and different things, what they've been doing before that. But generally, you wouldn't do too much within the last week, I would say. After there, you're starting to taper it, I would imagine.
But if you did do it 14 days out from a game, you're going for that specific game now. I'm actually kind of just thinking out loud here. It'd be an interesting thing to look at. Is I wonder when is the final day, because I remember when I was in the States, I was working with a team in St. Louis, and the running coach had this idea, and he pushed it heavily, was that you don't get the endurance benefits of a run. It takes about 10 days, he was saying, to get the endurance benefits of a run. So if he had his team running about 5 miles or 4 miles, whatever like that, he wasn't going to look to increase their fitness 10 days before competition. That was his big thing. And that was that he was also involved with runners at fairly high level. Like he was at a national level. Not that makes a difference, obviously, because everyone can make mistakes at times. But I always thought that was an interesting one, is that if you're looking to get the endurance benefits of a run, you want to kind of structure 10 days out from it. Now that was lower intensity stuff. That's not sprint stuff. So that's why I was wondering, did you ever come across anything that may be different to that, maybe opposed to that, or would the sprint side of things be different? How you structure it?
Yeah, I think around the 7 to kind of 10 days, something like that, and then start to taper it down probably is good. Maybe in the instance of a Gaelic football team, something like that, you could probably be near the week mark, I would say. But I suppose a lot of tapering studies, whether it's for strength or power or different things, in around that kind of week to 10 days is a good time. If you've built up a high workload before then, just to kind of bring things down and let them express their kind of higher level of fitness from the previous work. So around that timeline, I'm not too sure exactly
the exact date. Yeah, but that makes sense.
Something like that. Once you're managing the fatigue, and obviously that it's kind of not too long of a time, and that they're detraining. Obviously, you don't want that. But I'd say around that timeline should be good. And then you could be doing different tactical stuff leading up to the game, maybe just kind of lighter load, and that'd probably be a good approach.
Even more power stuff for speed-based sessions where you're not exactly fatiguing them, but you're working more on that kind of I don't know, as a PAP. Would you call that PAP?
Yeah, that's been used a good bit. Kind of even the day before, morning of, different things like that, and in the lead up, you're doing kind of lighter power stuff. But definitely with the speed, you certainly might have to watch it a bit if you're doing different sprints in the lead up. You can still get a bit sore from those kind of things, so it's just to be cautious of that. But if you're had it kind of well structured and tapered, you should be no problem.
Yeah. And would you mind even going into that, or talking a small bit about what PAP is, like basically the post-activation potentiation for people who don't know what I'm talking about, what that is, why people may use it in season, out season, is there a benefit of it when you do it, timing and all that, just off your own knowledge of it?
Basically, it's if you do a prior movement or prior exercise, we say before a time where you're going to perform, the idea is that the prior work is going to give you a net benefit. So it's the same idea of a warm-up that you do it, we say 10 minutes before or something. So with post-activation potentiation, there is a kind of balance between fatigue and the post-activation potentiation effects. So obviously if you perform the exercise too near the time, there's going to be high fatigue. But if you perform it too far away, the post-activation potentiation is not evident. So you have to kind of be in the right zone before it. So there's different times you can do, say obviously a standard warm-up will give you a lot of post-activation potentiation effects. But there is a lot of stuff that even a few hours before a game or the day before a game, you can implement a power session, something like that, and that may give you a net benefit. So that is something you could look at. Obviously with that, you'd want to be kind of on the lighter end. Obviously you don't want any necessarily fatigue from the day before. But anecdotally, guys will feel maybe a bit crisper, things like that. They'll have kind of sense that they're more powerful, and there is some kind of work to back that up.
Okay. And when you said, I know when you were saying like about a power session the day before, a power session, basically, when from your perspective, do you mean like getting into the gym and doing like 3x3 squats? You talking about like a ball slam or trap bar jumps, or what would you be looking at? Like how long would the session be? And what type of stuff would you be looking at including in it?
Yeah, in that instance, we said the day before, I'd include, it'd be a very short session, maybe 30 minutes, something like that, quite short.
Okay.
So a bit of a warm up. I wouldn't do any high loads necessarily. It might be like 40%, the 1RM for whatever it is. It could be a squat or a few jumps. But essentially it'd be a very light load. You're looking for a rapid power, mostly a kind of concentric. So you're not kind of lowering things. You're just explosive. It could be a ball slam, a few jumps, or even just some kind of trap bar deadlift with a light load, something like that.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. I think that's something that could be explored more. Like I understand that there's obviously a good bit of research out on it, but like what's optimal? What's an optimal time? And I'm sure when you're looking at like the higher level, let's say NBA and NFL and stuff like that, that they're probably looking at ways that you can do it. But I just think that's an interesting one that because of the benefits. I do it myself if I'm playing the football game, and you do notice that sharpness. And I always try to tell any clients that I'm working with, I kind of give them a bit of a thing to, you maybe do these 3 or 4 exercises before, the day before, or maybe a couple of hours before the game. And as you just said there, anecdotally, they come back and say that they really enjoyed it. They felt a lot sharper, felt a lot more powerful in the game. So I'm wondering, like, it would be cool in time to figure out what the actual ideal timing would be for the likes of a football game. But then again, I suppose what are the benefits of a 60-minute game? Would it be more you get the benefits of the first couple of sprints as opposed to the 60-minute game? Do you know what I mean? Is there...
Yes. I think that'll be something that'll be very interesting to look at if you got with, say, one team just to do a protocol either a few hours before or day before, and then kind of compare it with another team who doesn't and see if one performs more work. To be honest, I'd say the effects wouldn't be huge. You mightn't even be able to detect it. But I think, as you said, it might give you more of a benefit at the start, and that you're kind of better warmed up, better activated, whatever. And then you mightn't necessarily see a huge effect throughout the game. But there may be some benefit, right? If you have an improved power performance, you're probably going to be able to better accelerate, jump, things like that. So you might be able to put out more output in a game.
Yeah, especially if you're looking at a big game around championship where the first ball, first 2 balls make a big difference on whether you win that and lose it, on your mindset going into the rest of the game. So I can see, even if you did have that extra step for the first 5 minutes of a game, how much of effect that could have on you mentally, carry over for your performance for the rest of the game as well. Outside of, let's say, the psychological side of it, I could see how it could be huge as well. That's really interesting. I suppose moving on from that side of things, then you also looked at recovery and recovery strategies in GAA. Do you want to kind of talk around a small bit what you looked at in that situation?
Yeah, so we looked at initially players. So we got a fairly large sample. So I think around 1,400 came back, and we got something just over, I think 1,100, something like that kind of went through the survey. So essentially we profiled a lot. We profiled their perceptions on a range, I think over 30 recovery strategies. So how effective or important they thought each one was, 1 to 5, we'll say. And we also explored, well, what do players actually use? Because we don't necessarily know that. And then we kind of were like, why do they use these strategies? And then beyond that, to take it a step further, we kind of looked at practitioners. So we looked at then sports coaches, physios, nutritionists. We looked at, well, what do they think is effective? And then we wanted to see, do players and kind of practitioners and coaches, do they think the same, or is there a difference in what they find? And generally what we found, there was a lot of differences based on biological sex, based on playing standard, and different sports prefer different things. And we also found, looking at the practitioners, we also found the nutritionist sees things differently to the physio. The coaches see things differently. And then as a whole, we saw that the coaches and practitioners actually rate things a lot differently than the players. So there are an awful lot of differences in thoughts and protocols being used. And essentially, may go further with that. And we have things like training time, hours per week, different, how long is your off season? We might have a look at those, and we see if players who train more, do they do things differently than players who have maybe only 4 hours per week, something like that. So again, there's a lot of stuff to take into account and look at. So we'll be a while looking at that and figuring things out, but we have a good bit of stuff done already.
Yeah, and what did you notice then? Because it's funny, as you said there, how the nutritionists, I'm sure they rated, like, obviously what you would expect, diet and hydration as highest. Physio, I can imagine they looked at active recovery, or even sleep or whatever. That'd be an interesting one. What did you notice that was the biggest change between the practitioners and the players?
The biggest thing that jumped out at me is that the practitioners thought a lot of the kind of more psychosocial stuff was more important. So like getting for a walk in nature, chatting with your teammates, different things like that. The players kind of rank the more mechanical stuff like ice baths, the kind of more physical stuff, but then the coaches and practitioners are kind of looking at discussion with teammates, relaxing, imagery, whatever. So there was a kind of trend for that. Another kind of thing we noticed that was almost ironic is that the we noticed each kind of practitioner ranked their own trade a little bit lower than the others. So
really?
the likes of the physios didn't rank massage as effective as we'd say the others. Or we also found that the like of the sports coaches rated most things a lot higher than the strength and conditioning coaches or the nutritionists or physios. So there is definitely different opinions and thoughts. So it was interesting to see that.
Geez, yeah, that's the exact opposite of what I would have thought.
So it was a bit fun. Well, I think the nutritionists and things rated obviously diet highly and stuff, but we just off the top of my head the physios ranked massage lower, which I thought was interesting. Yeah,
but I would hope they would, to be honest. Like I would really hope they would, because, and I can imagine a lot of the population that you may have sent it out to would probably be younger physios, in terms of, like, let's say between the ages of 20 and 40, where massage isn't as much of a thing anymore, while it's still in the older game. I don't know what age the population was, but no, I'm not telling you. Was there? Did you look at that? Did you look at ages of them, or?
We did look at age. I can't think exactly. I remember the sports coaches were older on average, possibly than the others. So I think you could be right there that the other practitioners may have been kind of younger, possibly.
Yeah.
But I need to have another look. But I think that could be right.
And I only saying that out of experience, and that, like, I know a lot of people who will, like, especially clients that will come to me, and like, if they're dealing with injuries or they're dealing with long-term injuries, and a lot of them will have been relying on massage and dry needling as a recovery strategy, especially when their like hamstrings are tight, or if they're getting recurring hamstring injuries or calf injuries. A lot of the time they rely on that, and a lot of the time when you kind of dig into it, and not all of the time, obviously, but some of it is based on a lot of outdated research, and outdated research that would have been pushed 15, 20 years ago, while now the kind of newer practitioners, even though they still do, because some of them get caught when you're in like a private practice and stuff like that, you have to follow certain, you kind of have to make sure that people are feeling good straight away after the session. So you have to think a lot of short-term results as opposed to longer-term results. And when you're looking at short-term results, you're looking at massage and you're looking at dry needling and stuff like that. But when you're looking at longer-term results and you're really pushing, like, get out for a walk in nature, or even go for a swim, sleep well at night, stuff like that, it's not as, what's the word? Like, it's not as appealing. It's not as sexy for people, as opposed to go in, lie down, get a rub in the hamstring and feel great right after it. I can see how that would be from my perspective. Now, then again, that's why the research there to prove me wrong. But how that could be possibility that age would be a huge factor in the age of practitioner as well. But yeah, that's interesting. And what, looking at that, okay, so it's something that I actually push a lot, is that walking in nature and getting out. And the reason I look at it is I look at like nervous system or alertness, and moving you from more of that fight, flight, freeze state into more of a rest and digest and recovery phase. Have you looked at any of the research around walking in nature, around getting out? I know social sport is a huge one. I know you were obviously looking at opinions in that, but did you get to dive into a bit of the research on the other aspects and how effective they were as well?
Not too much, to be honest. But I know that a lot of recent stuff is looking at mental fatigue in sport, and that seems to be very high, and which has actually a meaningful impact on a lot of performance. So if those kind of things can even just bring down mental fatigue, they're probably very beneficial. Because you'd imagine in the like of Gaelic games where guys have jobs and you don't know how stressful your job is, and then you have to get to train, and if you're inter-county, you have different things, lots of travel as well. So you'd imagine that mental fatigue could be an issue in Gaelic games, considering the long seasons, things like that. Guys are committed for so long, and it's such a complete buy-in kind of thing. So certainly I'd say things to alleviate that would definitely be beneficial. But I'm not too sure on their direct effects. So I would need to look into that more, but I would suspect that mental fatigue could be a key thing they could bring down.
Okay. And I suppose, in your opinion, when you are looking at mental fatigue, what are you looking at in mental fatigue? Is that like cognitive processing or emotional fatigue, or what would you be looking at there?
Yeah, I suppose a lot of research I kind of just looked at from the top of my head, it might be in something like swimming or different things, or we'll say between sets of an exercise in the gym, people are given a task, a cognitively challenging task, or they're made to go on their phone or different things like that, just to kind of, and that might have a small impact on performance. But if you're looking at, if guys are getting fed up with doing something over a longer periods, that might possibly have a similar impact. So you definitely need to look at the whole psychosocial and also the psychophysiological thing really, and kind of pinpoint where we can make improvements or where guys need to recover at what end of the scale.
Yeah, it actually it brings to mind this it was the research that they did years ago it was on willpower actually is what it was, but I can imagine that it would translate over in a way, especially when you're talking about mental fatigue. It's funny that it only just popped back into my head there. But they basically looked at people so they basically took two groups, they put them in a room. They said one of them, you can have as many cookies as you want in front of them. And then they put in front of the other people, they put like a load of radish. And they said, they said they had two plates. They said, you can have as many cookies as you want for one group. And you have to avoid the radish. And then the other people, it was like, you have as many radishes as you want, but you can't touch the cookies. So it was like the willpower of avoiding the cookies. You're not allowed to touch them at all. And obviously the fact that no one really wants to be eating radish there when there's a nice plate of warm cookies beside you. But they basically brought those people in after, and they tested them to see who would last longer on an unsolvable puzzle. Okay, so they gave them a puzzle that there was no way they could ever solve that. And they found that the people who had to resist eating the cookies lasted significantly shorter, and a good amount shorter, like I think maybe 30% or 40% shorter, like a fairly significant amount, as opposed to the people who were allowed to eat the cookies and didn't have to care too much for the radishes. But it goes to show that like it is a finite resource, and if willpower is a finite resource, anything else can be as well. With like if you have to get another set in and you're saying, oh, will I go up weight here, do you know, or will I just keep it at a weight I know I'm comfortable with? And if you're doing that consistently every week for 12 weeks, 14 weeks, 18 weeks over a season, those small differences can add up and have a huge effect. So I can see how that mental fatigue would definitely play a role there as well. That's an interesting one. Yeah, it's funny that just jogged my memory.
That was an interesting study there. I can't imagine trying to get that through ethics with the radishes and unsolvable puzzle. But
it's torture. It's torture at another level. It's like the marshmallow test that they did with children. You've heard about that, have you?
No.
They did this. It's a cool one. They did it in the 90s. That they basically they put children in a room. They put a marshmallow on a plate in front of them, and they said, if you don't eat this marshmallow, I'll give you 2 marshmallows. So they found that the kids who were able to delay gratification, they followed up 25 years later, did better in sports and in school or in life, let's say in their relationships and in college and stuff like that. So they tested them at a young age, but it's an interesting one. The marshmallow test is called. One to look into, but to kind of come back to it then, I suppose, looking at recovery strategies, what was the most used one with GAA players?
In general, I think we found that the most prevalently used ones are kind of well proven. So that you're like we say regular sleep routine, different things like that. Strategic dietary intake around games or training, obviously rehydration. A lot of those things were implemented, but there was maybe some things, maybe less so or more so, but it was good to see that the most proven things were the most implemented anyways, which is probably most important.
Yeah, I suppose. And then when you're looking at like recovery and recovery strategies and stuff like that, if it was yourself and you were laying out your own one, now I know you're an accomplished weightlifter as opposed to GAA player. If you were a GAA player, what way would you structure your recovery plan? Or if you were working with a team, let's say, and you had between Sunday and Tuesday, in a very basic sense, what would be the main factors or main pillars that you look at?
I suppose the unsurprising answer really is just manage the nutrition and be sure and get enough sleep, things like that. So obviously there's different approaches you can have with that, and that you get enough meals with adequate protein and carbohydrates throughout the day. that you're managing your screen time in the evening, caffeine intake. So people might hear manage your diet and sleep, and people think, oh, I'm doing that already. But I can guarantee you can probably improve something just to promote your sleep a bit further. Possibly athletes need maybe more sleep because they're doing more work, things like that, than general population. So it is something to consider. And then just obviously the diet, and you could obviously include things to alleviate mental fatigue as well, if that was a factor. Just going for walks, just relax with the family as well, switch off. Some guys might be reliving things or trying to constantly plan or over fussing, or being anxious about things, or overcomplicate things. You don't necessarily need to do that. I think just manage the basics and learn to switch off as well, and not be kind of over planning to some extent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I actually brought it up there, and we may as well kind of dive into it. If I'm right, is it 2 All-Irelands or 3 All-Irelands in weightlifting? Am I right?
Oh, just one. Yeah,
you just the one. Sorry, I thought you had the second one as well.
I seconded another one, but yeah.
You got second in it, yeah. Okay, fair. Well, to be honest, second one is good enough. One is more than me.
Well, it's quiet down there in the lower weight classes for sure.
And what? Geez, don't be too modest. What? When you were looking at your own training around that time, because I remember you were very strict with it. What were you looking at? Is there anything particular that you were looking at that trying to improve performance, small ways or bits and pieces or anything like that around competition?
Definitely. For me, I suppose there's challenges in that it was a weight management sport, so you're trying to get the weight down, but also keep the strength levels high and different things. So that is a kind of challenge to manage that. But there was different things just do to promote sleep, just kind of manage the food. I had kind of, because I was in a weight restricted sport, I had various measures in place just to manage my hunger and different things like that. So I had very strict meal time. So I just allowed myself to eat at set time. And I had similar meals continually. So I wasn't kind of managing cravings, different things like that. And then obviously just implementing stuff that I can get full sleep. Obviously, as you might know yourself, when you're in a weight restricted sport, if you're gone quite low, it can interfere with your sleep as well.
Yeah.
So things like that. So just anything you can do to manage that. So various measures. And then obviously with the training, managing the load as best you can and tapering at key times and just tracking a lot of things really. I thought that was important, that I think some guys mightn't do, especially in the GAA, in the gym, that you're tracking, monitoring what you're doing, and you have a kind of overarching plan. You're not just kind of going in gung-ho at various days. I think that's kind of important.
Yeah. Okay.
As you'd expect, yeah.
With respect to tapering then, before a game, let's say in championship, what way are you looking at doing that? Like what way, because the word tapering is thrown around, but how do you mean, like a deload, pulling back, complete rest week? What way do you look at it?
Yeah, so there's lots. If you look at, I suppose, we say a microcycle, you might call it, between matches in season, and there's ways to manage the loads. So obviously, you don't want to have too high of a load or harder trainings just before the match. You might have, 50-60% of a duration of a session at that time. I say the Thursday before a Sunday match, something like that. You might have a gym session then the Wednesday, possibly a power session the day before, and then maybe a harder session on Tuesday, something like that. So you're going to bias the work a little bit earlier in the week, which is obviously fairly intuitive, so that you're kind of managing fatigue across the week. But obviously you're getting in enough technical, tactical work, your own kind of the fitness work from the training as well. So you're managing things like that. I think the tapering just refers to that you're biasing the work maybe slightly away from the match in the week.
Okay, and gym work, how do you taper your gym work?
You can taper in the sense during the microcycle probably refers to that you have, we said, a harder session earlier in the week as well.
Okay.
So maybe slightly heavier, maybe more of a lower body emphasis. We say possibly a Wednesday, something like that, away from the game. And then just, we say, some kind of power session you could do the Thursday, Friday, maybe, what depending on your training structure, something like that.
Okay, fair. And I won't be bombarding you with too many questions now, too many more, because we've covered a load and we're jumping from A to B. But in terms of in-season gym sessions, let's say you're going to take a championship, you're in and around the, I don't know, quarterfinal stages of the year, what way are you looking at managing your gym sessions around there? Do you plan 2 sessions a week? How do you change it?
Yeah, so I suppose at that stage of the season, obviously, even well before it, your primary focus is your own training, regular team training, and then match performance. So with the gym, really, essentially at that stage, you're just looking to avoid detraining. So you're looking to maintain your strength and power levels, possibly where they are. So in terms of a structure, if you're going 2 days per week, off the bat, you could possibly do something 2 full body sessions, bias more work earlier in the week. And then, as I said, kind of more of a power focus at the second day of the week. Other things I do, it's not necessarily things you have to do, but you can slightly vary the movements. So you could have maybe a lunge pattern one day, some kind of squat pattern the other day, incline or decline, different things. So just to get some variation in, and you can have obviously one as the lighter session and different things like that. But generally with exercises, guys can pick them to their own preferences once it's a similar muscle group and they're continually doing it so that they know exactly how they respond to a given, we say, sets and reps and different things. So you don't want obviously too much chopping and changing, but you want to keep some level of variability just to keep them engaged and kind of enjoy the process of what they're doing.
Yeah, that's it. Like you need, I suppose you need to take into account the individual characteristics and what they enjoy themselves, because just getting to people to go and do monotonous sessions is just going to be, at a certain stage, is going to be draining and boring, and talking about willpower, you're going to be taking it from them and not going to be as interested in getting them in, so they probably won't get as much out of it. So I think that's huge, what you were saying there about it. It is up to the individual as well. Once the pattern is similar, the muscle group is similar, how you can kind of leave it up to their own devices as well. And yeah, so that's, to be honest, and like that's really everything that I wanted to cover. Like I was delighted about that. Geez, you went into some detail on a lot of things. I know I was firing questions off at you there, left, right, and center. But I suppose what I want to finish with then, it really is like, for yourself now, two questions. Like what are the next steps for you, or what are your next steps now in terms of like research and work in that? I know you had mentioned possible collaborations. I don't know if you can mention them on this, so I won't mention them yet. You can if you want to. And then the other thing is, like, I would say, it's what are you most excited about in the research, in the stuff that you've been looking at, the stuff that's been coming out? What excites you the most? And I suppose if you had the choice to go any direction, because I know obviously when it comes to it, you kind of have to, there's certain levels you have to get through before you can start doing crazy stuff. But what are you most excited about in the research at the moment? And if you could go any direction with it, what way would you go?
Yeah, I suppose my plan going forward, so with Offaly GAA at the minute, but I do intend to continue different research along the way. And then I suppose coming to the end of the PhD, I'll be looking for different positions at whatever places. But I think I have a lot of research interests I'd like to pursue in the next while. Even as I kind of mentioned there, maybe expanding the work, looking at if we change, or if we improve physical conditioning, does that have does that further the benefits, or is there a kind of plateau you might reach, or a ceiling? So it'd be interesting to see that if we kind of manipulate various things like that, does that have an effect on in-game workload or recovery after a game, different things like that. So yeah, I have, I suppose, a lot on the plate for the minute, but I'm definitely excited to continue on and do a few more things coming forward.
Yeah, gee, that's good. Good to hear, and it's always excellent as well to be kind of pursuing it, and as you were saying there, to get to the deeper levels of it. Yeah, I think what you're doing, man, is definitely leading. You're in terms of GAA, you're leading the way, which is great to see. And obviously we've been mates for years now, so in fairness, I was delighted to see you go on and take on the PhD. It's some undergoing. Jesus, that's tough work to put in the 4.5 years to get that done.
Thankfully, I don't know, am I leading the way now, but thanks a million.
Geez, no, not at all. I definitely with the stuff that you're coming out with, and I know, like with some of the stuff that we chat about off camera, and that like I can see that you're the right man to have in there, and I think that a lot of the stuff that you're looking at is definitely, when we look back on it in a couple of years, I think it's going to be groundbreaking stuff, because of the fact that you sent me the recovery strategies. when you sent that to me, the plan months ago, and you said, will you have a look through this about the practitioners side of things? Some of the stuff that I had seen you put in there was stuff that I haven't seen anyone else at any level consider. And that was a big one about that walking in nature, spending time with family and friends, stuff like that, where it's not like, let's say the psychosocial factors we know have a huge effect, and we know social sport, and we know getting out of your own head and kind of out into nature has an effect, but it's just not as measurable at the moment as jumping in an ice bath or going into a sauna or doing stuff like that is. And it's not as attractive either. So I think that because of that, you're definitely on a level ahead of a lot of people, from my perspective anyway. So I really appreciate you, man, jumping on the podcast again. I thought it was an excellent one and a lot of stuff to take from that. So yeah, Jesus, thanks a million. Have you anything to say to people before you go, or what would you leave with GAA players that are listening?
Just thanks a million, Robbie, just for the kind words. You're very good. No, I've nothing really to conclude. I suppose everything we kind of looked at is kind of, people might intuitively know it, but it's good to have some kind of black and white info behind it that this is the case, or this is what we're doing. So obviously, we're going to continue on, as I said, see what we can find, maybe do a bit more analysis on the recovery stuff and see that if that links to training practices. So we have some stuff on that as well. So we see how that goes. That could be an avenue for the future. And we'll see what we find then going forward. So it is exciting to continue on, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, good. Definitely do. I suppose the last thing then is, where can people find you, Lorcan?
I'm probably most active on Twitter, to be honest. Yeah. I had the Instagram thing there, but I actually think I've forgotten the password, so I'm not sure. I haven't bothered to try and sort that yet, so that's on the long finger for the minute. So probably Twitter would be the best bet, I'd say.
Yeah, Jesus, I still haven't got on the Twitter board yet. Like I'm still staying off it for now. But Elon Musk bought it there, so I might jump on board soon enough and see where he goes with that. But yeah, what's the name on Twitter?
I think Lorcan Daly 10.
Okay, perfect.
Capital L and D, yeah. So Lorcan Daly 10, I think.
Lovely stuff. And you're a researcher out of TUS. Is that what they call it now?
Yeah, Technological University of the Shannon, Midlands, Midwest.
Oh, short and long one. Short and sweet. Yeah, so thanks a million again, guys, for listening this week. I really appreciate Lorcan jumping on. Make sure to reach out to him if you have any questions. If you aren't on Twitter, get on to me and I'll send them on to him as well. So yeah, really enjoyed that episode. Got a lot covered. It's definitely one that I know, as you said, intuitively there's some stuff there that people have a good idea of, but you really need to rehash it, and you need to kind of get down to the bare bones of it and see what is the most important and what is not the most important, what to prioritize in season and out of season. So that's all for me today, guys. I want to thank Lorcan again, and I will chat to you all again next week. Have a good one, guys.